So Tuesday is Holocaust Memorial Day, and I thought, well, since I'm all alone here at the dog park, because she just had to go in, I wanted to talk to you about an aspect of the Holocaust that maybe not a lot of people know, and that is the Holocaust of the animals. Yes, there were a lot of people murdered, mostly Jews, like 6 million, as you know. And if you count all the people that were injured by it, you get a lot greater numbers. I mean, they also targeted LGBT. They also targeted handicapped people. They also mentally ill, anyone who didn't fit in the frame. A lot of people were targeted, but Jews were like the main players that they targeted, and the Nazis had all these laws that made it difficult for Jews to live. Like Jews couldn't use the public transportation. And one of the most difficult laws I find, and it's really hard for me not to cry when I tell about it, is the Holocaust of the animals, which was pets that belonged to Jews were euthanized. Yes, they were even thrown off. They were thrown out of windows because Jews were not allowed to keep animals. That's one of the laws they had. So the animal, by belonging to a Jewish family, would just be killed. And can you imagine someone like me who loves animals so much and I couldn't keep a pet? I don't know. And also pets are a great comfort. And during a war, you couldn't even have your dog alongside you to comfort you. Your dog would be taken away and killed, basically. And it sounds like really the worst thing you can do. My maternal grandfather, talked about having a dog, even though he was a religious guy. You know, he came from a religious family, and he had a dog because he worked in the woods. My grandfather was working in lumber. They had a lumber mill, and he had a dog that used to protect him, a German Shepherd. And he said if it wasn't for the dog, he would have been killed for sure by people trying to rob him. So he was all alone in the woods, perfect target, a Jew, and so they would try to attack him, but the dog was protecting him. And I never asked him. I never knew about it. I just found out about this Holocaust of the animals a few years ago. And every time on Holocaust Memorial Day, I make it a point to talk about it, because there's so many animals that were murdered just because they belonged to Jews or belonged to anyone, not to mention animals that were killed because they were in the war. Every war involves killing not only innocent people, but innocent animals, and plants, wildlife, animal are killed. But the fact that you took pets from people and said you don't have a right to keep this pet, and that dog or cat had to be killed, or parrot, whatever, that is just so heartbreaking and so cruel, because supposedly they love animals, the Nazis, but then they use them. You don't love an animal if you use it to threaten other people. What do you have there? Shiva, drop it. Drop it. She found all kinds of things here. I don't know what Shiva, come here. Oh God, what is she eating? So I wanted to tell you about that because it's a very serious matter. Because, the way you treat animals is also the way you treat people. And if you know anything about the Holocaust, maybe you heard of the cattle trains on which they took the Jews to concentration camps, to their final destination, being mass murdered in horrific ways, whether it's gas chambers or whether it's shooting, torture, very, very sadistic behavior towards people who did nothing to threaten you in any way. And in fact, they had a very good social standing, and they did a lot for society. Sigmund Freud, the founding father of modern psychotherapy, he could have been killed. And in fact, they actually arrested him, the Gestapo, the Nazi police, and the story goes that he had to, there was pressure by people to release him, and so somehow they agreed to release him if he writes some words that he was treated fairly. So he wrote a very cynical note that I recommend the Gestapo. I highly recommend the Gestapo, or something like that. And then he was allowed to go to London. He was already sick, I believe, or shortly afterwards he died. But he did make it. He did manage to escape to London with his dogs. He had chow chows, and he used them in therapy. Like when he was conducting a therapeutic session, the dogs would be right beside him. So that's like a bittersweet story. But most of the people couldn't keep their pets. And famous person is Anne Frank, who had to leave her cat behind. And there was a cat. I wonder what happened to that cat. There was a cat brought into hiding. And nobody talks about what happened to that cat. Because to those of you who don't know, Anne Frank is a very famous girl because she kept a diary, which was published. And, you know, it's hard to relate to 6 million people's tragic deaths, but one person is easier to feel their tragic premature murder. So Anne Frank was a young girl who was forced to flee with her family to hide. They hid in an attic. It's now a place of tourism in Amsterdam. I haven't been there, but I did read the diaries. A wonderful girl whose teenage life, years that her youth had to be spent hiding away from the Nazis, and somebody snitched on them, and they were hiding with another family and a man, and the family brought in a cat. Her cat was actually left behind, her beloved cat. I can't even imagine that, leaving behind your cat, going into hiding. But I wonder what happened to that cat. Anne Frank and her family, except the father, they were all murdered in concentration camps. The father survived, and he published that diary. They found the diary after the war and published it, so people would know what happened. You know, there's evidence, but there's nothing like a person describing the horrors, the laws. She was an amazing writer, would have been an amazing writer had she been able to survive. And she died a horrible death. She was ill, malnourished, ill, and she and her sister and her mother, and I think most of the family that hid with them, they died. There was also a cat. I wonder what they did to that cat, if that cat did manage to be free somehow. But the Nazis did euthanize any pet belonging to a Jew, the Jewish person, and that's absolutely shows you the depth of the hate. And even animals, you know, animals, is there an animal that's a Jew or Muslim or Christian? No, of course there isn't. And animals were labeled because they belong by association to a Jewish family, and then they were not allowed to live. So the amount of hate is just indescribable. I do not like Holocaust Memorial Day because it's a day that's very hard for me emotionally to hear all these stories and to hear about how cruel human beings can be. I mean, don't we have enough examples day to day in the news of people that are cruel to other people? Every day people murder each other for no reason at all, because there's no reason to kill anyone. And I really do believe that animals are the key. If we treat animals in a humane way and avoid slaughtering them, and know that the model the Nazis used was that of farms, because the cattle trucks the Jews were loaded on were cattle trucks. So if we stop this horrible, horrific meat and dairy industry, what would happen? We would have less cancer, less heart disease, and a lot more humane people. Now, a lot of people say, well, Hitler was vegetarian. Yes, but it's not enough to be a vegetarian. You have to be a vegetarian for the right reason. And if you can't just treat animals well, you have to treat everybody well. You have to treat everybody kindly. And it is easy to love animals because they can't really talk back. They can't tell you what they think about you. They're really helpless, and they're at a, you know, they can't do anything. They can't run away. They have nowhere to go, do they? So they're basically enslaved to us. But people are much more difficult. It's much more difficult to love human beings. And you don't have to love everybody, but if you understand that everybody's struggling, everybody has their battles, everybody has their issues, and try to forgive, not for their sake, but for your sake. That's what I tell myself, because I'm not an easy person with human beings. I'm struggling my whole life to understand why human beings can be so cruel and unkind. Because I didn't grow up in a very kind family, and the side of the Holocaust was the nicer one. What I can tell you is that if there's one thing we can learn from the Holocaust, is to really try to be kind to everybody and try to make moral decisions. And if you see somebody struggling and suffering and you can do something about it, for God's sakes, do it. And it starts with the helpless of our society. Animals, people with special needs, handicapped people, people who struggle in some way. But on the other hand, I have to say, you really have to be kind to yourself. People that are kind to themselves don't really feel hate. If you're nice to yourself, you can't really hate. Hate comes from not basically liking yourself. And cruelty to animals is from people that are cruel, period, that they haven't really done enough hard work, like working on becoming a kinder person. So we can learn that from animals. They're so nice to us. You know, dogs can take so much. I never tested it because I'm not cruel, but you know, she forgives so much. Come on, sweetheart. And I forgive her, like the muddy paws. The muddy paws, I'm going to wash you when you get home. And she forgives me the fact that I need to wash her feet. Basically, she just wants to be wild and just jump on the sofa with her muddy paws. But that's not going to happen, sweetheart. So, yeah, I just wanted to talk about that. People don't know. And I really hope that in this world, people will stop following crazy sects and crazy extremist ideas and stop fighting each other. We're not like in a competition who's the best. Be in a competition with yourself. Be a better person than you were yesterday. That's what I say to myself too. Peace, light, and love from me, Shiva La Diva.